Thomas, welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So guys, let's have an uncomfortable conversation about race and politics. I gotta be honest, I don't quite know why this is an uncomfortable conversation, even though I do perceive that it is. At least it feels that way. That's not necessarily going to stop me from having the conversation, but at the very least, you should acknowledge that that feeling is there in presenting the topic and the information. We look, race has always been a political issue from the beginning of this country. It's just the way it is. One of the key questions, at least for today, 2017, why do Republicans vote against their own economic self-interest? I'm fascinated by this question because it seems to be very clear that one party actively is for the rich. The other party is also for the rich, just not to the degree that the first party is, the Republican Party. In order to talk about this, I need to go far away from this topic because I need to build up why I'm making this case or how I'm approaching this case. Let's bake into the cake that everyone, each person, is a little window. Meaning, where I'm from, my racial identity, the people who I grew up around, the situation I grew up in, the things, the events that I myself have encountered in my particular life will inform my perspective and my point of view. And if I'm being earnestly when I'm engaging a particular topic, that point of view is valid in the same way that other people's point of view are valid. Yes, some point of views are more valid than others. But I'm making the point that what I'm going to say is probably going to rub people the complete wrong way. But is it true? Like, I understand the preconceptions. But be honest, be consistent, and ask yourself, is what I'm saying true? And does what I'm saying have merit in regards to the case that I'm making? We need to start at the beginning. Because I kind of need to challenge some of the illusions that people have when this regards to this country. Oftentimes, whites have this tendency of saying, why are we talking about things in the past? Well, and look, I can understand why it's uncomfortable to have that conversation. In order to get this country, there was a massacre. That was the original sin. Murdering people from one end of the continent to the other, or one end of the country to the other. Wiping out an entire race and group of people. In other cases, putting those people in what amounts to concentration camps of sorts. Giving them smallpox blankets, forced marches, all these things, all these disgusting and devastating things in order to steal the land that they themselves owned. So, that's just a flat fact. That's just a flat fact. It just is what it is. The next sin was slavery. I didn't ask to come here, but I am here. That needs to be honestly engaged. And what I mean is, I'm not saying it in a sense to kind of bash anybody or anything like that. That's not what I mean. I'm stating this more so just as a flat fact. We have to understand the argument that, oh, we should only look forward with this stuff doesn't really hold water. The advantages that certain people have in society didn't happen overnight. Those advantages were based on policies and things that took place over the last 400 years. Your present-day reality contains elements of the past. Even though it was far back in the past, these things are connected. It's not as if, there's some space of time that's disconnected completely from some other space of time. That's not really the case. Much of the wealth in regards to, I think the last thing I saw was like blacks had 1/13 the income of whites. Understand, most of the wealth, the way that wealth is accrued, has more to do with how it's passed from one person to the next. Meaning, a white person starts off at a higher economic state than blacks because they have more money in their particular family. When they get that, when that kid grows up, that kid starts off at just a better place. It has nothing to do with the person being lazy or not working. That has everything to do with historical context. The point I'm making is, starting back from 400 years of forced free labor. After that, you had a Reconstruction. After that, you had Jim Crow laws. During the Jim Crow laws, you had a situation of limiting where African Americans could stay, the jobs that African Americans could work. Legal institutions, the way the courts, the way the police, all these things regarded a group within that society. Oftentimes, those things were turned a blind eye towards. Oftentimes, they were finding justifications for having people as second-class citizens. They would come up with active justifications for those behaviors, all the while concealing all of this stuff with, oh, those guys are just being lazy, those guys are just being this or that. There's no basis in reality. It was done purely to cover how people were feeling about the things that took place in the country. This country does not honestly engage its past. Ultimately, it doesn't like to talk about it for various good reasons. It's painful to engage on both sides. Understand the depravity that took place in the founding of this country didn't just adversely affect the people who it was against. It also demeaned the people who were doing it. In the process of dehumanizing somebody else, the person dehumanizes themselves. They're inextricable from one another. It's tied. It's one-to-one. If I'm going to do this to somebody else, I have to become a monster to do those things to somebody else. I need to come up with a justification for trying to make this person into a non-person so I can justify having him work in this way. I can justify rape and murder and pillaging and beatings. I can justify those things based upon an ideology that I present and I try to propagate through society. Now again, this is just flat fact. I'm not making a point to belittle or berate or any of that stuff. I'm not even making the point to make an argument for reparations. Nothing like that. I'm giving an honest basis of a perspective of saying both of these things are true. These are things that happened in the past, and these things that happened in the past have propagated through time. As they propagated through time, there's certain permutations that take place. There's certain things that give advantages in one case and hurt other cases. It's just the way it is. It's just reality. All of the present is built on the past. It's just the way it is. Now, as that propagates, we're talking about maybe, let's say the 80s. Let's say the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Civil rights movement during the 60s. So 400, almost 500 years. All the way up to maybe, 50 years ago. You started getting a stronger version of a civil rights movement where there was an active attempt at saying, okay, fine. You are people, in fact. You are a man. You are our equals. But mind you, that's hard fought. And not just hard fought. It's not even necessarily believed by everybody. It's one of those things where good people, for the most part, accept it and acknowledge it. But there's still repercussions to the things that happened in the past, particularly in regards to the position, economics of the people within that particular country. I'm not making this case to excuse or to in fact, the case is just being made purely for the accuracy of the case. It's just saying, this is what took place. This is what happened. These are the tangible results of what took place and what happened. These are the dynamics, economically, socially, that played out based upon the things that happened. The goal isn't to castigate. The goal is just to engage it, honestly. So you reach a situation where one of the demographics, just based upon the historical context of that particular demographic, is behind. Greatly so, particularly within regards to economics. But a fair and honest appraisal would say that the reason they're behind is because of the things they went through in the country itself. That's not race baiting. That's not even pulling a Sean King. That's just a, well, yeah, that's just true. That's just true. I get it. It makes you uncomfortable to have the conversation. The conversation isn't being made to make you uncomfortable. The conversation is being made just to engage the topic. Honestly. That's all I'm trying to do. And look, my own heritage is mixed. I have African American. I've only really considered myself an African American. But my grandfather was a Cherokee. I'm pretty sure I have white people in my family. We have a complex heritage. All of us. There are no purebloods. For the most part, I think it was like Obama had, it was related to Dick Cheney. Like some weird stuff. All of us. This idea of being white. This idea of being black. Those things are, they're just ideas. They're concepts. There's no there. It's as if the society needed to find a way to distinguish people, to create factions within a particular society. In creating those factions, you are able to divide people who would have otherwise, for the most part, from a political standpoint, from an economic standpoint, should be in alignment. But you're able to use a wedge factor of color to create a disparity between the two. And by disparity, I just mean you can split the opposition. So even though this African American works at this particular company, and this African American for the most part is getting shafted, the white guy that he's working side by side with, that guy is also getting shafted. The African American votes Democrat because A, the other party for the most part has been hostile just to their identity in general. The other guy votes Republican. Now, the Republican vote is going to be against the guy's economic self-interest. If we're being honest, even the Democrat vote, to some degree, is going to be against the person's self-interest, but not to the same degree. It is an interesting question as to why the Republican makes the decision to vote against his economic self-interest. I found that those people also, if we're being honest, don't like to engage certain topics of race. Honestly. They would use this thing of, well, they should just get over it. Well, they should just, well, the cop one is like, well, I mean, they wouldn't get murdered by cops 4 times as higher if they just didn't respond to the cops. Like, it's all these things, these illusions that these guys come up with in order to justify how things are. When Donald Trump ran, for the most part, Trump made this case. Look, he was being racist. I'm sorry, he was. He was being misogynist. That's not why he won. Understand. You didn't have this large number of racists come out to vote for Trump. That wasn't the case. Those people were already in the Republican Party. What it did for his campaign, honestly, the thing that it ended up doing, I don't necessarily think it gave him this huge boon of votes. I think it made some people think he was being honest. I honestly do. I didn't quite understand. I was like, well, why do they think this guy's being honest? He's lying through his teeth. It's clear and apparent he's lying through his teeth. I think you have some people, some groups, some demographics that hear the things that he's saying and just say to themselves, that guy's being honest. He's being overtly racist. In being that way, they regard it as being honest because to their mind, libs keep telling us how we should act, how we should behave, and they try to put limits on speech and the behavior that people take. I've had conversations with right-wingers. That bugs the shit out of them. Now, I may greatly dislike the things they say. I even may greatly dislike the way they think about some of these things. But do I need to force them to understand me? Do I need to force them to understand my heritage and all that stuff? For my shared economic self-interest. You can hate my guts. Just don't fuck me in the polls when we're going to make a vote for something purely out of some kind of wedge issue. But we have to understand that the reason that wedge issue exists, the reason why you do have that breakdown of people who vote a particular way against their own self-interest, is because something matters to them more. That something is race. That something is race. It's hard to justify any other reason why somebody will vote Republican when Republicans clearly are working against their interests. Now, these guys will make up a lot of things to try to convince themselves that they're not being scammed by the Republican Party. They would take on certain behaviors. They would take on certain ideas beliefs, all these things. And look, whatever, that's fine. But these things are mostly illusions. What it really does boil down to is these people are trying to tell me how to think. I want to be able to think the way I want to think. If that means bashing a particular demographic, I don't necessarily want to be continuously called a racist for doing so. If that means not wanting to necessarily pay taxes to the poor and everything else, then that means I don't want to do it. I don't want to give that money to all those darkies. The ironic part of this is that whites, by far, use more welfare and handouts than any other demographic. Even though they see it this way, like even though they view this stuff as being welfare, as being a handout to blacks, they don't realize that they're hurting themselves more than they're hurting any other demographic. That's fascinating to me. That's fascinating to me. It's almost as if there's a karmic repercussion for the behaviors that we take with regards to race. At the end of the day, we're in this country together. That's not changing. You're not going to have a situation where you're going to unravel all of this. That's not going to happen. How we pursue our shared goals, meaning how we persist in this country, it's going to be together. Or it's going to be not at all. There's not this thing of a separate but equal and all this other stuff. We make progress when we make that progress together. That doesn't mean downplaying the stuff that happened in the past. That doesn't mean pretending that stuff didn't exist. Nor does it mean using that stuff in the past to browbeat people over and over and over again about the things that took place. It just means engaging a complex history. Engaging something that was difficult and painful. Something that for the most part affects us to this day. Affects our politics. Affects the way we think about these things to this day. Engage it honestly and fairly. That's my point. That's what I'm getting at when I'm making this case that says part of the reason why these guys vote against their own economic self-interest is because one party accepts all of that. They don't stress them on identity. They don't stress them on the way they should or shouldn't think in that sense. For the most part, they just want you to vote for them so they can get their tax cuts and everything else. But it allows them to bring people into the party. There are going to be a lot of things that these guys say that I don't particularly like. But between those two things, I don't need to force those people to say something in the way that I need them to say it. No, I don't particularly like them bashing transgender people. I think if somebody wants to call themselves a woman, acknowledge that they want to call themselves a woman. But am I going to get mad and shun somebody because they don't want to do that? They don't want to acknowledge that that person is a transgender or that person decided to change their sex. No, I think it's gross that they don't acknowledge it. But that is their prerogative, whether or not they want to acknowledge it. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about saying, this guy's a person and this person is going to have his own opinions. I don't have to agree with that person's opinions, but they are going to have those opinions. All things being equal, I would rather that person vote in my interest or vote in their own self-interest, because our shared self-interest matters far more than any of these little items of identity. We are far more alike in an economic standpoint than we would ever be alike in regards to our identities. And part of the problem of identity politics is it creates a massive wedge in that society between all those people. So this complex heritage, this complex situation to which we find ourselves in regards to this melting pot, instead of it being a source of strength and moving forward, instead of it being a source of a shared heritage of sorts. No, it wasn't necessarily the greatest thing in the world. But can it be overcome? Fuck yeah, it can be overcome. It just takes an honest engagement in what took place and the repercussions of what took place and how what took place still pursues to this day an attitude and the way people and the positions people take, even in the mindset of people. Understand, even in the mindset. I watched this video between Malcolm X and James Baldwin. And it's a fascinating watch, whereas one side is making this case of, we want our just desserts now, and the only way we're going to accomplish this is by being separate and distinct from America. And James Baldwin's point of, we have a complex heritage, and pretending that complex heritage doesn't exist. pretending that the vestiges of that complex heritage does not reach into the present, doesn't work. It gets you nowhere, and it have you living in illusions. Let's end the illusions. Let's engage these things honestly. Let's have the conversation in regards to, okay, we have a complex heritage, but how do we move forward? How do we actually meet and make consensus viewpoints? Like, to essentially find things where we agree and make headway into those things, and stop allowing the political parties to manipulate people within a particular society based on identity. Both parties do it. It's not just Democrats. Republicans do the same thing. They're allowed to pivot off each other, and in pivoting off each other on these points, they're for the most part able to divide the society. The only way you get a situation where you can have somebody with billions of dollars and that person ends up with a massive tax cut is if you have a divided society that would allow that to take place and allow those people to squabble over issues other than issues that actually matter. I think the reason why people vote against their self-interest is because they're using other things to justify that vote. Part of the things that they're using to justify, if we're being honest, is race. That is still our legacy to this day. That is still our problem to this day. And I make the case, O-U-R, all of us. There is no distinct individual in this. It's all of us. We have a complex heritage. We're all at this point, black, white, Native American. All of those things are mixed. We're a melting pot. The sooner we realize it, the sooner we take on these things honestly, the sooner we engage that stuff honestly, the better off we are. The faster we'll progress. And the less likely these parties will be allowed to essentially to fuck over the population. I'm not making this case with this guy of reparations. And look, I actually think an argument can be made for it. I mean, you're talking about a demographic that literally built the society and got no compensation for building that society. But I don't think it's politically feasible. And to be honest, I'm not even sure it's necessary. I am more into this idea of shared prosperity than I am of... Look, I just think if you do something like that, you're going to create a huge division in that particular society because the society is not going to engage that information well. Americans are bad at understanding historical context in regards to the present. We can attack a country in Iraq, kill upwards of 1 million people, and within a few years, the people in the country are like, they need to get over it, and they need to, just kind of pull themselves together. We helped them out as much as we could. Now, the honest recollection is, well, we did attack that country, destroy it to smithereens for something that never took place, meaning Iraq had nothing to do with attacking us on 9/11. We did destroy that country. We did kill all those people. We did torture that population. How were you all of a sudden, just a few years after that, making the case of saying, yeah, they need to get over it? That's a problem. This country has a hard time of engaging things honestly, the behavior that we take, honestly. And it screws with our ability to have these conversations. And it screws with our ability to actually talk about this stuff. Because the moment that you discount my point of view and say, oh, just get over it, you've lost credibility to me. The honesty of it is, yes, that stuff did happen. Yes, that stuff does have a consequence. Yes, the consequence does propagate through society. Yes, it was up until probably the 80s where things started to actually change in regards to how African Americans were able to integrate themselves into society. That's like 30 years. That's like 30 years. So, all I'm saying is, let's be fair. Let's be honest. At no point in this conversation did I browbeat anybody. I just stated the reality of the situation. At no point in this conversation, even though I know it's probably difficult and uncomfortable to hear, the stuff that was said is honest. I'm being earnest. We're all crackpots. And I don't mean crackpots as in crazy. I just mean we're all flawed. Nobody's perfect in this regard. So, a little bit of forgiveness in the sense of, yes, this took place, let's move forward. That's fine. But you have to engage that honestly to kind of take that step of saying, let's move forward. You can't pretend that the things that took place didn't exist. And you can't pretend that the things that took place does not have an actual intangible effect today in 2017. I'm sick of these parties. I'm sick of having this back and forth conversation about identity and about how politicians use identity to, to push their objectives. Whether that's Obama being black and using that as somewhat of a political tool. Well, it's Hillary Clinton being a woman, using that as somewhat of a political tool. Well, it's Donald Trump being white and using that as somewhat of a political tool. I'm tired of this stuff. Let's move forward. Let's move forward. Alright, I'm going to leave it at that. This went way too long, but I really did kind of want to engage this topic. Like I said, I have a lot of right-wingers on my page, and they're probably not going to like this conversation. Libs have a tendency to engage in these type of conversations, but they tend to be over the top in the opposite direction. Just be fair. Just deal with the evidence, the information itself. It's not about bashing anybody. It's about coming to some consensus and moving forward on that consensus. I want to bring people over to my side. In order to do that, I need these illusions. I need these things that people use to justify their behaviors. I need those things to go away. And I need to actually deal with the reality of the situations. Yeah, I think that's the only way to move forward. So, alright guys, thank you.